Okay, so here's a claim that's going to sound backwards. The cheapest food in the grocery store is often better for your PCOS than the expensive, healthy stuff with the pretty packaging. I know that sounds like something I'm making up to make you feel better about your budget, but it's actually rooted in how insulin resistance works. You don't need the $14 almond flour or the trendy adaptogen latte mix to manage your hormones. You need whole, unprocessed food that's cheap almost everywhere. And today I'm going to walk you through exactly what that looks like, aisle by aisle, so you can stop standing in the middle of the store overwhelmed, staring at labels, wondering if you're doing this wrong. I want to start here because I know what it's like to feel like managing PCOS through food is a rich person's hobby. You see all these influencers with their perfectly curated pantries, their $40 seed oil-free mayo, their supplement drawers that look like a pharmacy, and it's easy to think, well, I can't afford to fix my hormones. But that's not true. And honestly, some of the most PCOS-friendly foods in the entire store are also the cheapest things in there. So let's actually walk through this together, the way I'd do it if you and I were shopping side by side and you texted me confused in the cereal aisle. The first thing I want you to understand, and this is the part that surprises people the most, is that the perimeter of the store matters way more than the aisles. And it's not because the middle aisles are bad, it's because of how your body responds to processed carbohydrates when you have insulin resistance. Here's the mechanism. With PCOS, most women have some degree of insulin resistance, meaning your cells don't respond to insulin as efficiently as they should, so your pancreas pumps out more of it to compensate. High insulin doesn't just affect blood sugar, it also signals your ovaries to produce more androgens, which is a big part of what drives symptoms like acne, hair thinning, irregular cycles, and stubborn weight around the midsection. Highly processed carbs, the stuff that's usually stacked in the center aisles, boxed cereals, crackers, white bread, snack bars, break down into sugar incredibly fast. That fast spike means a fast, big insulin response, which over time keeps that whole cycle going. Whole foods, the stuff usually along the outer edges of the store, produce meat, eggs, dairy, frozen vegetables, don't do that in the same way because they still have their fiber, their protein, their natural structure intact, so your body digests them slower and your insulin response is gentler. So practically, what this means is you actually want to spend most of your cart time and most of your money on the perimeter and treat the center aisles like a quick supply run for specific staples, not a place to wander. And here's the budget-friendly part. Frozen vegetables are just as nutritious as fresh, in some cases even more so because they're frozen at peak ripeness, and they're almost always cheaper per serving, and they don't go bad in your fridge if life gets busy and you don't cook for a few days. That's huge if you're managing PCOS brain fog and fatigue on top of a budget, because it means less pressure to use things before they spoil and less food waste, which is really just wasted money. So when you're in that produce or frozen section, don't feel like you have to buy the fancy organic berries. A bag of frozen mixed vegetables, frozen broccoli, a bag of frozen spinach. These are some of the best dollar-for-dollar purchases you can make for hormone health, and they usually cost a fraction of the fresh equivalent. Now let's talk about protein, because this is the second thing that trips people up, and it's actually the most surprising point I want to make today. A lot of women think that to eat PCOS-friendly, they need to be buying wild-caught salmon and grass-fed everything, and look, if you can afford that and it makes you feel good, wonderful. But protein quality matters way less than protein consistency when it comes to blood sugar regulation. What your body actually needs is protein at every meal, in a reliable amount, to slow down how quickly carbohydrates hit your bloodstream and to help you feel satisfied so you're not chasing sugar cravings 2 hours later. Eggs are probably the single best value item in the entire store for this. They're cheap, they're incredibly versatile, and they combine protein and fat in a way that's very steadying for blood sugar. Canned tuna, canned salmon, canned chicken, these are shelf-stable, they're inexpensive, and they let you build a protein-forward meal in minutes without any planning. Dried beans and lentils are another one people overlook. They're some of the cheapest protein sources per pound in the entire store. And because they combine protein with fiber, they're doing double duty for blood sugar stability. Even canned beans, just rinsed to cut down on sodium, are a fantastic budget staple. And frozen chicken thighs, bought in the family pack and portioned out at home, are usually significantly cheaper per pound than buying small amounts of chicken breast, and thighs actually have more fat, which again helps slow digestion and keeps you fuller longer. So the mental shift here is, stop thinking about protein as this expensive, complicated category, and start thinking of it as, What's the cheapest reliable protein I can put on my plate at every meal? Eggs, canned fish, beans, lentils, frozen chicken thighs, even plain Greek yogurt when it's on sale. These are your PCOS grocery MVPs, and none of them require a big budget. The third point, and this one is more actionable than surprising, is about reading labels the smart way instead of the anxious way. I don't want you standing in an aisle for 10 minutes flipping a box around trying to calculate net carbs or panicking over an ingredient you can't pronounce. Here's a simpler approach, and it's rooted in the same insulin mechanism I mentioned earlier. When you're choosing between two versions of something, a cereal, a bread, a granola bar, look at the fiber number relative to the total carbs. Fiber is what slows down that sugar release I talked about, so a bread with 3 or 4 grams of fiber per slice is going to behave very differently in your bloodstream than a bread with 0 or 1 gram, even if the calorie count looks similar. Similarly, added sugar is more important than sugar as a general category because natural sugars in something like plain yogurt come bundled with protein and fat that blunt the spike, but added sugar dumped into a flavored yogurt or a cereal is just straight fuel for that insulin response. So my rule of thumb, and this takes maybe 5 extra seconds per item once you get used to it, is check for at least 3 grams of fiber and try to keep added sugar under 8 to 10 grams per serving. That's it. You don't need to memorize glycemic index charts standing in the cereal aisle. You just need those 2 numbers. And here's where the budget part comes back in, because a lot of women assume the healthier version of a packaged food is always going to cost more. And sometimes that's true. But a lot of the time, the store brand version of a high fiber cereal or a whole grain bread is actually cheaper than the name brand sugary version because you're not paying for marketing and cartoon characters on the box. So don't assume PCOS-friendly automatically means pricier. Sometimes it's genuinely the same price or less. You just have to know what number to glance at. The fourth thing I want to walk you through is meal building on a budget, because knowing what to buy is only half of it. You also need a system so you're not standing in your kitchen later wondering what to actually make with everything. And this ties back to that insulin and blood sugar mechanism one more time, because the goal at every meal is roughly the same formula: a protein, a fiber source, and a fat, because that combination is what slows digestion and keeps your blood sugar, and therefore your insulin, and therefore those androgen-driving hormones, on a more even keel throughout the day. So when you're in the store, instead of shopping by meal ideas, which can feel overwhelming, shop by category and let your brain assemble it at home. Grab your proteins, eggs, canned fish, beans, frozen chicken thighs. Grab your fiber sources, frozen vegetables, a bag of rice or a bag of oats, maybe a bag of frozen berries, which are usually cheaper than fresh and still loaded with fiber and antioxidants. And grab your fats, a jar of peanut butter, a bag of shelled sunflower seeds, olive oil if your budget allows it, or a cheaper vegetable oil if it doesn't, a block of cheese that you can portion out yourself instead of buying pre-sliced. When you get home, you're not following a recipe, you're just combining one item from each of those 3 categories, and that alone puts you miles ahead of a lot of expensive meal plans, because you're hitting that protein-fiber-fat combination that actually matters physiologically, without needing a single specialty ingredient. I also want to mention something practical here that isn't a mechanism exactly, but is very real for anyone shopping on a budget with PCOS-related fatigue or brain fog, which is decision fatigue at the store. If you've ever stood in an aisle and just felt your brain shut down trying to compare 5 different brands of oats, that's not a personal failing. That's genuinely exhausting cognitive work, especially when your hormones are already taxing your energy. So give yourself permission to have default choices. Pick one brand of canned beans and always grab that. Pick one frozen vegetable mix and always grab that. Removing the decision entirely every single week saves you mental energy for the parts of your day that actually need it, and it usually saves money too because you're not impulse buying something new every trip. One more thing before I wrap up, because I think this is where a lot of PCOS content misses the mark, and that's the emotional layer, not just the physiological one. When you're on a tight budget, feeling like you should be eating a certain way and can't afford to is genuinely stressful, and stress itself raises cortisol, and cortisol interacts with insulin in a way that can make blood sugar regulation harder, so the anxiety about doing it right can actually work against you a little. That's why I wanted this to be a real walkthrough with real cheap food, not an aspirational list you'll never actually buy. Eggs are not a consolation prize. Canned beans are not the budget version of real PCOS management. They are legitimately some of the best tools you have, and the research around insulin resistance and PCOS consistently points back to these basic principles: fiber, protein, whole foods, not to specialty products with a hormone health label slapped on the front for triple the price. So if you walk into the store next time and just remember 4 things: spend most of your time and money on the perimeter, prioritize cheap, consistent protein over perfect protein, use the fiber and added sugar numbers as your quick label check instead of over-analyzing everything, and build meals by grabbing one item from a protein, fiber, and fat category instead of hunting for recipes, you are going to walk out of there with a cart that's both affordable and genuinely working with your hormones instead of against them. If this actually made the grocery store feel less overwhelming, I put together a free printable shopping list that has all of this broken down by category, the exact cheap staples I mentioned today, plus a few backup options depending on what's on sale that week, so you're not standing there trying to remember everything from this video. It's linked below, completely free. Just grab it before your next trip so you're not starting from scratch. And if you found this helpful, there's a lot more where this came from on managing PCOS without it taking over your whole life or your whole budget, so stick around.